Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the program. With me, our guest, about to answer the $1 million question. Are you ready? The client just paid their invoice. Do you A, deposit the money into a low-risk savings account? B, pay off your credit card debt? C, start planning a family vacation? Or D, immediately go on YouTube and start comparing yourself to other filmmakers, resulting in the algorithm feeding you review videos of the latest cinema camera, which eventually leads to a never-ending pipeline of similar videos, all convincing you that if you don't upgrade to the latest camera, then you aren't a real filmmaker, until you eventually cave and buy a new camera, only to have the cycle repeat itself in 14 months. Chloe, get out of my frame. Go. Chloe, get out of the frame, Chloe. In the last 12 or so years that I've been shooting content, I've jumped around a few different camera bodies, which is totally normal for anybody who's been shooting stuff for that long. Not every camera I bought was a wise decision, and a lot of it was fueled by me watching videos on YouTube and just working myself up thinking that if I don't buy this camera, then I'm not going to make it to the next level of my filmmaking career or whatever. So this is the camera I bought in 2019. And it's been the primary camera that I've used for all of my work ever since. So today I just want to talk about the whole rat race of buying new cameras and buying new lenses, and tell you guys a little bit more about my experience with all that, just so if you yourself are in a similar position where you think, oh, I need to buy this new camera or I need to buy this new lens if I want to stay relevant or if I want to compete. Well, take it from me, somebody who's been doing this for a long time. I've made a few mistakes and I'm going to talk about them in this video, and by the end of it maybe you'll have a better idea of whether or not you should actually upgrade or if it's just something that's all in your head. So this camera originally launched in 2019, and since then Blackmagic Design released a few different versions of this camera. First there was the Blackmagic Pocket 6K G2, which is basically the same camera but with an articulating screen and the ability to add an EVF. Then they released the Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro, which took everything that was in the G2 and they added an internal electronic ND to it, which, as somebody who used to shoot on the Sony FS5, was a feature that I really missed. They also released the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K, which has similar features but a much larger image sensor. Then recently at NAB, they announced the Blackmagic Pixis, which has a bunch of new features, most notably being its new box design, which is something the community had been asking for a very long time. Now here's the thing, those are 4 different cameras, all by Blackmagic Design since 2019. And I didn't even mention any of the Ursa series just because they were never really on my radar at all. And that's just from one company too. There are other brands like Red, Sony, Canon, and Panasonic. They all have released multiple cameras since August of 2019 that all cater to different filmmakers based on their needs and budget. Now, I first picked up the Pocket 6K because I was really impressed with the image quality and the colors that I was seeing coming from the internal B-RAW files. It also came with a free copy of DaVinci Resolve, and that was a program that I was wanting to learn more after seeing all the cool tools that were available, especially on the color grading side of things, but just as an overall editing platform, it looked really powerful. And I wanted to learn it to just improve my skills and stay on top of everything. But when it came down to buying the original Pocket 6K, just like every bit of gear I had bought before then, it was motivated by 2 things: the fear of missing out, otherwise known as FOMO, or gear acquisition syndrome, which is otherwise known as... So suddenly the 4K footage coming from my Sony FS5 just wasn't looking good enough. It was looking soft. My colors weren't popping as much as I would have liked. And in my head, I thought that dropping a couple $1,000s on a new camera with a whole bunch of new accessories would fix that. Plus, it would give me the sweet dopamine hit I was craving. As a wise Canadian once said, "Get 2 birds stoned at once." So I did it. I sold off my current gear and I pulled the trigger on a Pocket 6K rig, and instantly I fell in love. I immediately noticed a huge difference in image quality and how much more enjoyable it was to work with Blackmagic RAW compared to something like S-Log 3. So like all new and shiny things, I enjoyed the honeymoon phase, but then Blackmagic went ahead and released the G2. It didn't really faze me too much because an articulating screen wouldn't really affect my current setup I had, but then the Pocket 6K Pro was announced. The internal NDs would have been nice, but I had already grown accustomed to the variable ND filter in my matte box. But when the Blackmagic 6K camera was announced, that's when I started questioning things all over again. The images coming out of that camera were absolutely stunning, and YouTube was feeding me a consistent stream of examples of why I need a new camera. And it wasn't all just from Blackmagic Design either. My algorithm on YouTube was showing me video after video of new cameras that did some things much better than my current setup. The Sony FX6 looked like the perfect camera for documentary work. The FX3 was the perfect travel camera, and the Red Komodo was something that, in my mind, would somehow legitimize me more as a filmmaker.
Voila, cinema.
It also didn't really help that around the same time is when I stumbled across the terrible Blackmagic rigs community on Facebook and Reddit, which, come on. It was the perfect storm of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. For the longest time, I was totally fine with the image quality coming from my camera. I was fine not having continuous eye tracking, autofocus, or in-body stabilization, but now all of a sudden, these new cameras were making me question my entire shooting style. And by the way, absolutely none of this is new to me. Over the 12 years I've been shooting content, I've jumped around camera bodies. I've never really been a brand loyalist per se. I originally started with the Canon T2i. After that, I made the jump to the Canon C100 and then actually over to the Sony A7500 because I wanted to shoot 4K. Then that brought me to the Sony FS5 because I missed the ergonomics of the C100. And then eventually I finally arrived at the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. Now, don't get me wrong, some of those jumps were very, very much warranted, and it really did improve the quality of my work. The T2i, as old as it was a solid little camera to learn on, but the jump to the C100 improved things in so many different ways. The jump from the C100 to the A6500, however, is something I really, really regret doing, and I'm kind of embarrassed just looking back on it. The camera community on YouTube at the time, they had me convinced that if I wasn't shooting on a 4K camera with in-body stabilization, then I was seriously missing out. And like an absolute idiot, I decided that I needed to sell the C100 while I still can and get into the Sony ecosystem. That camera was a pain to use too. It was small and awkward to hold. None of the buttons were where I really wanted them to be. Shooting 4K was nice, but the 1080p footage I got from the C100 was more than enough for the work I was doing at the time. I fell for the bait, hook, line, and sinker.
Got your ass.
I've been shooting with the Pocket 6K now since 2019, and it consistently impresses me whenever I go to edit the footage. So much so that it makes me stop and think whenever I get the urge to buy a new camera. The jump to the 6K full frame will probably make my images look prettier, but would it really make me a better filmmaker? When I look back on the last 12 years of creating videos, it's easy to equate the jump in quality with the acquisition of my new equipment, but that's only a small factor. What was actually happening is that I was improving my skills in multiple areas. I was planning my shots with more detail. I was lighting more of my scenes, and I was getting more creative with the sound design and my editing in general. For the longest time, I had this run and gun mindset, but once I started thinking like a director, and even just storyboarding in general, that's when I would see the biggest changes. Also, things like lenses, lights, supports, and other modifiers would really make the difference. Cameras just tend to get all the credit. Every time I see a cool video on Instagram, the first few comments are usually people asking what camera they used, as if purchasing that camera will allow them to create a similar video. What a crazy thought, right? It took me a lot longer than I would have liked to realize that gear could only take you so far. And it's true what they say.
A lot of people say you can't smoke dope and get drunk when you have kids, and that's not true. You can, but you still gotta get up in the morning.
No, not that. The other thing. It's not the camera, but who's behind it. So just remember that the next time you're feeling the urge to bust out your wallet.